Okay, this is called a journal. Okay, we use T accounts to help us to understand debits on the left, credits on the right, and every transaction we need to have a debit and a credit. In accounting land, when we talk about accountants and CPAs, when they're out there looking at transactions, they don't use T accounts unless they actually have to go through and figure out all the different accounts that will be affected. Sometimes I'll get stumped when we're doing things in QuickBooks and I need to figure out exactly which account's increasing, which account's decreasing. I'll break out a T account and I'll use that to figure it out. I hear that a lot from my students that go on to study college and accounting, that when they're going through and they have to really think through a large problem, they will use those T accounts. But 99% of the time, we are going to be using a form called a journal. Okay? And in this accounting class, we are going to be starting with the journal here that has some special columns to it. So what I want to do right now is, before I teach you about it, I want to look at this journal and I want you to understand what is on there and how we're going to use it. When we fill out the journal, we're always going to start from the left and we're going to move to the right. Okay, so when we go to complete it. But first thing we need to look at is at the very top of it. You will notice that on the upper right-hand corner up here, it actually says page 1. What we will do with journals, sometimes they'll be pre-numbered, other times part of the assignment will be to put the page number in. There's only going to be one page 1 of the journal. 15 years from now, I'm not going to have a new page 1. I would have page maybe 150 or 713. So they're always going to be sequential. Why? Because it allows us to go back and track information. Okay? You will also have a new journal for every month. Okay? You may have one month that will take 3 pages. For example, think of a golf course in the middle of July. Would they be really busy? Hopefully, otherwise they're going to go out of business, right? Now think about the golf course in February. They're going to have much fewer transactions. So maybe in July they use 3 journal pages, but in February they only use half of a journal page because they're not going to be as busy. What's important to realize is we have always make sure when a new month starts, we have to start a new journal page. But sometimes because of the size of our business, we're actually going to go through and have multiple pages for this. It usually makes more concrete sense when we physically use a piece of paper because you can only fit so much on a piece of paper. When we do it electronically, it's kind of hard for you to understand because you're like, well, why don't they just add more rows on the bottom and then it don't have to have a new page. But I'm teaching you the way that a lot of people that do accounting by hand would use, and they would physically have paper they would fill out. Are any of you treasurers or have seen the book for any clubs in the high school? Okay. You physically have a journal page also that you complete for a transaction. It's a little bit different than what we're going to be doing here, but you are going to complete it for, you don't have to have a new page for each month, but you have to start a new page for each year for that because of what we're keeping track of for our clubs is a little bit different than what we do for accounting for businesses. So when we look at our journal, we know our page number. Right here, the heading journal gives us a clue that we are working on a journal. Okay? On the left-hand side, we have this heading here called date, and notice that there are 2 columns underneath it. If we were writing using a pen or pencil, I would actually have to fit 2 things in this little box, but Applia, the way it's designed, they can't fit 2 things in there, but pen and pencil I would. Right here on the left-hand side, I would actually abbreviate the months. Okay, so we're in October right now. How do you think I abbreviate October? OCT. And if I started typing in O, it's obviously going to give me the option for October because there's not any other month that starts with an O. Does that make sense? Okay, so this column here is going to be the months. Am I ever going to have a journal that would have 2 months on the left-hand side? No, because you start a new journal page with every month. So the top line of every journal will always say the month because it's a quick spot for you to look to see what month this journal is for. Now, this smaller column to the right is always going to be the date column. So it could be the 1st, it could be the 7th, it could be the 15th. Now, you did find with some transactions in Chapter 2 that maybe you had 3 transactions that had the date of the 10th. Would that be true? Each transaction needs to have the date. There may be a transaction that will take 1 line. There may be a transaction that will take 2 lines. There may be a transaction that would take 3 or 4 lines. But each transaction, you have to put the date here for it. And your transactions should be in your journal in date order. Okay? So it shouldn't be the 10th and then the 3rd and then the 1st. It should always be in sequential date order. Applia will get really mad and mark things wrong for you if you have them out of date order. Because it knows on this line it has to be the 3rd and it needs to say this and this and this. And if you don't have it, it'll be wrong. And then the spot that was supposed to be will also be marked wrong. So Applia really penalizes you heavily if you have it out of date order. If you had everything right but in the wrong order, what could you do? Print it off and you could argue some points back with me, right? Because if you told me why it should be right and yours made sense, and you can't just say, I didn't put it in the right order, you need to tell me why using accounting words, why yours is still right, I would give you points back. Again, you need to use your accounting vocabulary and tell me why. And that's the part that I want you to do, and I will give points back if your argument is correct for accounting. Okay? So this is the date. Now, this heading here says account title. Guess what we put in there? I know, kind of crazy, right? So I'm going to hit on that a little bit later, but moving further to the right, now we have this column here that says DOC, no. Yes, document number. Anytime we do anything for a business, there has to be proof of it. So, for example, this is a form that Dalton received, and because of this form, he has to do something for accounting. So some people that are books, what is this for concessions? If you've done any club books, you should know what this is. What happens to the club because of this? Money is going out. Because of this form, money is going out. And what happens on the very bottom of this form, there's information on a date and a check number. So basically, this is saying that we paid with a check. And on here's the check information. So the source document for this would actually be the check number. Okay? Other things that we would see would actually be a receipt. For example, if you go to Don's and I buy a pizza, I give them cash, they give me the pizza, and they give me a receipt, correct? On that receipt is actually going to be a pre-printed number that would need to be filled out. If you pay dues to me for FVLA, anytime somebody ever gives me cash or any money for anything, I will give a receipt, and it will look like this, and it'll be pre-printed numbers in the corner. Why? Because that's proof that you give me cash or a check, and I am accepting it, and then you can go back and later and say, but Mrs. Grassel, I did pay you. Remember I gave you a receipt? I can check my receipt book. There's duplicate copies. It's good accounting practices to always give receipts for it. No receipt, don't have proof that I received it. So a receipt is another source document. Okay? You are also going to have a purchase invoice. Purchase invoice means we're going to be purchasing things. Sales invoice means we're going to have, for example, Sarah wants to get a golf lesson from me, but she's going to pay me later. So a sale occurred, but she did not pay, so I have to do a sales invoice. There's a lot of information in the beginning of section 3.1 talking about our different source documents and what they use. The other one that you're going to see used a lot is going to be a memorandum, and that's basically a note kind of explaining something that happened. That'll be another source document. Now, in this column right here, post-reference, please notice it's green. Can you actually type anything in here? I'm going to tell you we're going to spend an entire chapter working on this column. For Chapter 3 right now, just know to ignore it. It's called post-reference. It's very important. We will learn about it in a whole separate chapter. Okay? Now, that is those columns there. Now, moving further across to the right. Now, this is going to be where we put in numbers. We are not going to put in commas, and we're not going to put in dollar signs. What we are going to do, and this is going to be especially important if we get to the point when you need to actually write on them, because I'm going to be giving you some assignments in the future where you physically need to write on it and it's not going to be on the computer. You need to line up your decimals. You will see that there are kind of like 3 columns. This is going to be your cents, this would be your hundreds, and this would be your thousands. We're not going to get bigger than that right now, so don't worry about what would happen if you had millions. We're not going to do that right now, okay? So if you need to put in cents, and I'm going to give you a heads up, it's going to be probably 5 to 6 chapters until we actually deal with cents. They're going to keep your life really simple, and everything's going to be in nice round numbers. Accounting 2, isn't it nice when you don't have cents? Just more reasons for mistakes. They have cents now, and it causes pain. Okay, so if the transaction was really 100, if I just typed in 100, it would automatically put in the 0.00 for me. But you have to make sure that you include cents. If you were going to be handwriting on a piece of paper, you can't just leave the cents off. What you need to do is point and do 00, or you can do point and dash to indicate that there are no cents for it. But when we look at these column headings, you will notice right here it says general, and then there's a debit column and a credit column. So, do we have an account called general? No. So, we are going to use these columns for any columns that don't, or for any accounts that don't have a special column. Let's look at the next column. It'll make more sense. Look at this. Right here for numbers, what does it say? Sales credit. Do we have an account called sales? Yes. The credit side of sales is the increase side of sales. I'm going to give you a hint right now. None of our customers are going to return anything. So anytime we have a sale, it's going to affect sales at a credit. Always, always, always. Okay? We're keeping our accounting land nice and simple, and nobody returns things, and everything is happy with what we do. Trust me, that makes your life easier. Okay? So anytime you have a sales, you know that sales will need to be credited, which is why we only have one column here calling sales credit. Should a business be in the keeping track of lots of transactions where customers are returning things? Is that wasted time and business and energy time for the business if everyone's returning things? Okay, so typically businesses are not going to have a special column for sales debit because that would mean things are being returned. Now, next, look at the next column over it. We have the word cash, and it spreads across 2 columns. And notice how it actually looks like a T account, just like under general. T account with debit being on the left, credit being on the right. Ooh. Think maybe that's by accident? You're singing the song in your head. I know you are. Okay, cash right here. On the left-hand side is going to be debit. Right-hand side is going to be credit. We know cash is an asset. Assets get increased with a debit. Okay? So if you are going to be increasing cash, that means you're going to be receiving cash. And here is my best tip for you. In a business, if cash is going out, right now, our business is going to be writing a check. Right? We're not dealing with credit cards. We're not dealing with anything else. If a business is paying cash for something, they're going to write a check. Check starts with what letter? It affects what account? Which starts with what letter? And how is that account being affected? Decreased. What's the decreased side? Credit. So if you're writing a check, you are affecting cash as a credit. Those are all C's. Correct. And if you remember that, if you see anything, any transaction that starts with paid cash, you know half of the transaction already. Cash has to be credited. Source document is a check. Cash has to be credited. C cash, C check, C credit. All go together. Then you just have to figure out what is going to be debited, correct? And if you know half of it, that makes your life a lot easier. Okay, so we know right here, this column here is only going to be used if we are going to be going through and affecting the account cash. The left-hand side would be if cash is going to be increased. The right-hand side is going to be if cash is going to be decreased. So what we have here is we have three special columns for numbers: sales credit, cash debit, and cash credit. What happens if I was going to affect supplies? Where would it go? Capital. Accounts payable, Shopco. General. Anything that doesn't have a special column, guess what? We have to put an account title here. Does that make sense? Down the road, we're going to have some transaction that affects two special accounts, but we'll get to that later, okay? But just realize, if you don't have a column for it, it has to go in the general column. So it's really important that you understand the difference between general columns, hence why it says general, and our three special columns. And our special columns, again, are sales, cash debit, and cash credit. So we have three special columns and two general columns. Does that make sense? Okay, I really spent all of this time talking about what a journal is and explaining concepts before we even looked at a transaction, because if you understand how a journal works, it makes it much easier for journalizing. 30, we're out of here. I am not going to do work together today in class. We'll reserve that for tomorrow. So for the last couple minutes, you can go ahead. If you have not started reading Section 3.1, you could read Section 3.1 and work on your outline. Okay? 1 second.